Hello there. You're listening to Linda Pinizzato here at the Hayes FM. And I was talking about Fintrac and Fintrac requirements. And I will tell you, just as an update, there are some new changes. The Canadian Real Estate Association was lobbying to ease the compliance burden of new Fintrac requirements. Interesting enough, on a Friday afternoon, Fintrac issued guidelines that outlined the practical implications of new anti-money laundering regulations that would have taken effect one day later, which was actually on February the 1st, 2014. But after 2 years of sustained lobbying by CREA, they have significantly and substantively reduced administrative and record creation burdens of new requirements. So something you may want to take a look at. And if you do, just go into Google and type in Fintrac and it'll direct you right to our provincial government website. And you will be able to receive all the information that you need. It's under www.fintrac, fintrac.gc.ca. Now, moving on, how did I even come up with this subject today? I actually, you know what, I started thinking about, condominiums because of investors and even real estate, to be quite honest with you, and different mandates and regulations that we have to follow as realtors. And it started to make me think again about, protecting us and protecting our investment and making sure that, as a wonderful country, our economy, we move forward. We have all the necessary tools there to have a wonderful, viable country with employment and investment and all the great benefits that we have here in Canada. And interesting enough, with so much development of condominiums going on, but on one side and on the other side with concerns on, how things are moving forward with condominiums, and certainly in relation to the Condominium Act, which I just received notification yesterday, as a matter of fact, which I was very disappointed. I understand the reasonings behind it, but that doesn't erase the disappointment that the Ministry of Consumer Services have tabled the Condo Act review right now because of considerations with where we're at with the provincial elections. So, it's disappointing because it almost seems sometimes, don't you feel that you move 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and, all of a sudden now after 18 months, it almost seems like we've moved 4 steps back, and it's really hard to determine where this whole thing is going to move forward. And hopefully on the Condo Owners Association website, we've actually put out a call out to the PC and the NDP to get a bit of an idea of where they stand with respect to condominiums and the Condo Act review, especially because of the elections and the potential of changes in government depending on the results. But, getting back to condominiums, when we look at value and, granted, condo owners, you have the right to go and ask your board for information with respect to the reserve fund and the operating budget and get paperwork other than just at the standard once a year AGM. But the question is will you be given that information? And that's where the big concern is, because of the mass amount of people right now who don't feel that they have any rights because they are having conflicts and they are having difficulties. And the question is, why is this all happening? So the big question as well is that I want to ask you, do you know whether or not there is a limit on how much condo fees can be increased? Think about that question for a second. Did you know that there is no maximum amount? The Condo Corporation, they set out the budget for current operating expenses and the reserve fund. As a matter of fact, I'm the president of a condo board in downtown Toronto, and next week we have our budget meeting where we're going to sit down and look over all of our operating budgets up to date and try to pinpoint where the inflationary increases are going to be for different types of utilities and service trades and so on. And strictly based on what we believe is going to be, an estimate. That's how we're going to determine our budget. And generally speaking, it really simply lies in line with, where the economy is and what kind of increases have been set out. For instance, you're talking about hydro, very substantial hydro increases, and talking about increases on water and services and so on. But, we understand the cost of inflation. We have no problem with that. And we can work with it very easily. And we also have an extremely good reserve fund and contingency fund and even a surplus from over the years of making sure that we practiced a lot of due diligence. So in the last 4 years straight, we have only seen in the building that I'm involved in, we've only seen, roughly between a 1.5 and a 2.9% increase each year with respect to maintenance fees. That's it. I'd like under 3%. And that is really exceptional because it's not the norm. I mean, the norm is that you can see some buildings that are 10, 12, 15%. And you got to sit back and say, what is going on? But, the other question is your reserve fund. Even if your operating budget is working really well and you're not getting a huge increase on your maintenance fees, but then you take a look at the little tab part on your operating or your financial statements at your AGM, and you see that you don't have much of a reserve fund, you've got a problem. Because reserve funds, what are reserve funds? Okay, they're used for major repairs or replacement of common elements or any assets of the corporation. That's what they are. And any type of those type of changes must be approved by the owners of at least 66.66% of the units. Now, when they say units, I got news for you. That's not just units mean the condo unit. It also means units as, for instance, if the building has owned parking, that's considered. If they have lockers, that's considered. So sometimes I think when people hear the percentages of units, they actually think that it's units with relation to just the amount of units in the building. So in other words, if you have 312 units in the building, 66.66% of the units, but that isn't correct. But what if all of a sudden, the board decided that maybe they need new equipment, I don't know, in their exercise room. Maybe they've decided that they don't like their wave pool anymore and they want to take on a huge renovation to get rid of it and transfer it into something else. They can't just unilaterally be making these kind of decisions, especially if they're outside of the use for the reserve fund, because they cannot be tacked on to an expense taking monies out of the reserve fund, unless, of course, the fitness equipment, for instance, is in line with your performance audits and so on. And it says, okay, fine. In 2014, in June of 2014, or say June to, October, whatever, that would be the time this year in line for you to be able to make changes to your exercise room. Well, that's different. But if it's just a unilateral decision of the board that they want to do this because maybe one member of the board is really heavy duty into fitness training and they'd like to see new equipment, well, no can do. That is not the way that condominiums should be operating, and certainly not tapping into your reserve fund. So, there's some circumstances where if your reserve fund is incredibly low, you may not have the monies to do necessary repairs. Now what do? What if those repairs are mechanical and the building cannot move forward without it done? Maybe there's water damage or problems or something that needs to be attended to, which is continuously increasing because it wasn't addressed at the time that it should have been addressed. So it was being held out. Well, if the board ends up holding out on things that come up for review to be done and they're considered major repairs or replacement, but they're not done, and they've decided to let it go a year or 2 years, and now there's other damage being caused because it's been let go, those could create a huge problem within condominium buildings. And if there's not enough money in the reserve, or the reserve cannot be touched for these necessary repairs, what does a condo board do? Well, at that time, they've got to get the money from someplace. So what they might do is take advantage of the section with respect to the Condominium Act, and that would literally be special assessments. Huge problem. As a realtor on the real estate side, any special assessment that shows up in status certificates are a problem. Absolutely, there are some surprises sometimes. I mean, you can't, we're talking about a huge condo building, and there could be situations where are unavoidable and they just happen, and you just don't have the funding for it. I totally understand that. But if you have a very low balance in your reserve fund, and now you've got a special assessment on top of it, well, now that is a huge problem, because the special assessment, if it was deemed at the time that you, as a unit owner, owned it, you would be responsible to be covering that payment. You can't expect a new buyer to buy into your unit and all of a sudden find out that they have an additional monthly expense over and above their standard maintenance fees, principal, interest on their mortgage, and their taxes. So definitely something to think about. And that's what the Condo Expert is all about. So you're listening to Linda Pinizzato of the Condo Expert, and we will